Vonage's Number Insights API delivers real-time intelligence about validity, reachability, and roaming status of a phone number, and tells you how to format the number correctly in the application. In this video, we're going to look at how to use this API with PHP. The tutorial will take you through the process of installing a micro framework called Slim, Vonage PHP SDK, and .env. You'll then write some code for 2 endpoints to make these requests to get the data from the Number Insights API. There are 3 levels of Number Insights available. The first is Basic, which will provide you with information on the country of origin and how to format the number correctly. The second is Standard, which will provide you with the same information as Basic, as well as determining whether the number is a landline or mobile, and whether it is a virtual number. If the number is in the US, you can also determine the identity of the caller as well. The third level is Advanced. This will provide you with all the information returned in Basic and Standard, as well as roaming and reachability information. This API is available as an asynchronous request, as well as a synchronous request, although it is recommended that you use asynchronous request. Before getting started, you'll need some understanding of PHP, which will also need to be installed on your machine. You'll need ngrok installed in your system too, and a Vonage API account for your API credentials. To begin with, in your terminal, navigate to the project directory and type composer require slim/slim vonage/client and vlucas/php.env. These are the libraries that we will be using within this project. Once complete, you'll see a composer.json and a composer.log file has been created within your project directory. You'll also see a vendor directory, and within here will be all of the libraries that we require for this project. Within your project directory, create an index.php file. Now, within the index.php file, we're going to include 3 classes that we're going to use at several points throughout our application. First will be the server request interface. We will alias this as request. Second will be the response interface, again aliasing it as response. And third, we'll be using the Slim app factory to initiate the application. Now, in order for these classes to be used, we need to include the vendor autoload.php file, which will automatically load these namespaces into our project. Now, let's initialize our application. We'll call it app, and we do app equals app factory create. Next up, let's create our first endpoint. We'll use app get, and then the endpoint will be number insights and 2 variables, type and number. Then we need to call the function with the request and response objects. These will be used within our function. And thirdly, we will need an array of arguments. This is our type and our number, which we'll be defining within the URL. So to start with, let's do a response get body, and then we write the body, which will be JSON encoded, and we'll do it as the args array to determine what was passed in via the URL. And then we need to return a response with the headers content type as application JSON. Now, none of this would work unless we define app run at the end of our application. To run our application, in your terminal, run php -S localhost 8000, and then within our web browser type localhost 8000 /number insight /basic or standard /your phone number. Let's add some validation of the URL parameter type to our function. At the top of the function, I'm adding a condition that checks whether the value of the parameter type is in a specified array. This value can only be either basic or standard. If the value is neither of these, it will return a JSON encoded response with the message that it can only be basic or standard. As this is being treated as an API, every response will be JSON encoded, and the response will have the headers of content type application JSON. If you go back to your browser and update basic or standard to be something other than those two, and then load the page, you will receive the error. Now it's time to make use of our Vonage API. First, we're going to need to add a new file called .env. And within this file, we need two variables. One is Vonage API key, and the other is Vonage API secret. These are the values that you receive from the Vonage API dashboard. Then go back to your index.php file, and under the require of the autoload PHP file, add .env equals .env/.env, create immutable. On a new line, following this, add .env load, which will load our environment variables into the system. Next, let's create an instance of the Vonage SDK object. To do this, type client equals Vonage/client. Then, as parameters for this object, add new Vonage /client/credentials/basic. Within brackets here, add the environment variables for our API key and API secret. As a second parameter for our client, add an array with show deprecations as the key and true as the value. Next, I'm creating a property map array, which will be used to compare with our SDK methods available with the API response, depending on which version of the Number Insight API you've used. Now it's time to make use of these objects we've created in our project. So within the endpoint, on the first line after array args, add use client and property map, which will be used within our function below. Midway through this function, add a variable called function equals args type. This will be the function type that we are calling within our SDK. And then below this, create a try catch. And within this catch, use the exception class and call it E. Below this is a response get body and then a return the response. Let's move this within the try. This will be the end of the code so long as an exception isn't thrown. Now at the top of the try, add insights equals client method insights, and then we're going to call the function, which is a predetermined type. Within here, we're going to set the args array value of number, which was passed into the URL. Next, create an empty array called output. This we use to output our responses from the API. And then below this, add a for each loop, which will loop through the property map using the keys as fields and the values as method. Then within this loop, use if method exists insights, which is the response from the API, property map, and within that array the element field. Within this condition, use output field equals call user function to call the function method called from insights property map field. And then within the response get body, update the variable args to output. This will output in our response to the browser. Within our catch of an exception, we need to return an error. So within here, type response, get body, write, and then this is also JSON encoded, E, get message. This is the message that is returned within the exception. And below this, type return response with header, content type, application/JSON. If you go back to your browser and make sure that the parameter is basic or standard, and then reload, you will see the JSON data that has been returned, for example your country code. If you update basic to standard, you will see an extra field which will be the remaining balance. This is an extra value of standard. In your terminal, open up a new tab and type ngrok http 8000. This will create a new instance of ngrok. Make a note of the URL below. Next, we're going to update our endpoint. So within the condition that checks if the array element exists, add the extra value of advanced async. And then within the response of the error, add advanced async as well. And then below the function equals args type, add a callback URL. Make this value null. And then below this, add a condition that checks if args type equals advanced async. And if it is, we're going to set the value of the callback URL to be our ngrok URL, which we've added in the terminal, followed by /webhook/number insight. This will be our webhook URL, which we will receive the information on a request. And then at the line where we call the insights function, add a second parameter, which will be our callback URL. Below this, add a condition which is if function equals advanced async, then we're going to return a different response. This will be the response that tells us that a webhook is expected. So within response get body right and then JSON encode, we're going to type the advanced number insights request is made as an asynchronous request. Please check your logs for the response. And then return this as with the headers of content type, application, JSON. And now it's time to create our second endpoint, which is a post request, and will be treated as our webhook. So at the bottom of the file below app run, add app post and then the URL, which will be webhook/number insight. Within here, we're going to define a function with the request and response argument objects. And following this, we're going to use the property match, which we'll be looping through with the response. So within this function, we'll open up a file for demo purposes. So output file equals fopen insight webhook result.txt, and we use this as a pen so we can keep the values from the previous request. Then we're going to add body equals JSON decode, and we're decoding the request values from the endpoint. So request get body and true. Then we're going to define output as null. And then finally, we're going to loop within our property map to determine whether these values exist in the request. We're going to check if the array key exists, then we'll append it to the variable of output. This will be the field and the value that is returned in the request, along with PHP end of line, so that we can return to a new line for each value. After the loop, add fwrite. So we're going to write our output value to the file, which is the output file variable. And then finally, close our file called output file. At the end, we're going to return response because a response is expected for this endpoint. Back in your browser, if you update the parameter standard or basic to advanced, you will get the error. However, if you update it to advanced async, you will receive a message to say that the Number Insights request is asynchronous. If you check in your logs, you can see a request was made and a post request was received. And then within the Insights value result, you will see the results. If you have any questions, we are more than happy to help. Please leave a comment below.